Welcome back to our channel where we share updates and untold stories about Catherine, Princess of Wales and her royal family. Today we bring you some significant news. Prince Edward banned, Camilla's son, from royal patronage after unprecedented scandal exposed. A monumental decision resonated through Windsor Castle on a Tuesday morning while the nation slept. Prince Edward, the Duke of Edinburgh, the monarchy's most quiet and meticulous son, answered quickly, surprising the royal household. Taking a major step against the House of Windsor's values, he removed Tom Parker Bowles's royal patronage. Astonished whispers turned into outraged wrath within hours of the palace shaking. What drove Edward, the quiet brother, to cause such constitutional and familial upheaval? The announcement was sudden. The Duke's Bagshot Park headquarters released a brief message after 6 a.m. It spread quickly among royal staff like wildfire through dry grass. Courtiers were shocked and called often to check the comments they were reading. Royal watchers couldn't understand it, given Edward's decades of steadfast loyalty to the monarchy. This sibling was always subordinate, obliging, quiet, and overshadowed by more vocal and famous siblings. He took power and had a lasting impact on the monarchy. Tom Parker Bowles, formerly shielded by his mother's carefully nurtured authority and elevation to the throne, was now brought under intense scrutiny. When he lost his patronage, his name became synonymous with public and brutal rejection. His presence in the royal realm and patronages were quietly accepted for years, even by many who hated their acquisition. Edward's unilateral power grab shattered that delicate balance, exposing the deep and dangerous cracks in a family that prides itself on control. The morning was filled with anxiety in the palace. Senior employees, asking for anonymity, called the situation nothing short of hysteria. Every phone call and whisper added to the shock. Rumors spread along passageways. Was Edward acting alone? Or was this the start of an unforeseen conflict? Was King Charles notified beforehand? Were the Prince of Wales and Princess Royal informed? Or were they as surprised as everyone else? The king's deep silence increased worry. Outside the royal gates, opinion was split. Crowds gathered quickly outside Buckingham Palace. Some welcomed Edward's audacity, waving hastily made banners, while others were outraged at the Queen's family's public humiliation. For a vocal section, it was a moment of expected justice, a defense of beloved tradition against an evil intrusion. They saw it as an unjustified attack on a son who had never wanted to be trapped by the monarchy's ruthlessness. Britain woke up to a divided house in the palace and on the streets. After the first shock and mixed reactions, a terrifying suggestion remained. Edward's crime was not spontaneous. It had the cold correctness of a well-planned project produced over weeks or months. This was not a reserved sibling's stress-induced outburst. The assault was intentional, which shocked even his closest friends. If calm Edward could plan this, what else is he planning? In secret, a quiet conflict. It was more than an uprising. The dramatic end of a long-running disagreement had been brewing quietly for years. Royal onlookers witnessed a distant but cordial relationship between Prince Edward and Queen Camilla, but tensions had grown into a secret, unrecognized struggle in Windsor Sandringham and Balmoral. Patronage was never the sole issue. It concerned power, respect, and the monarchy's fate. The public saw Edward as the quiet, obedient brother. Camilla skillfully handled the debates to become queen consort and elevate her family. It seemed to be a functioning but unwelcoming equilibrium. Despite the royal household's luxury, a grimmer reality was developing. Edward always felt uneasy about Camilla's dominance, but he never said so. Observers noted his frequent retreat into stoic calm during her public presentations, and his slight tightening of his face at the sight of her children, Tom and Laura, during formal functions. Domestic worker rumors said that Edward purposefully sat at the table's far end for private family meals, separating himself physically and metaphorically. As if a barrier had been built, he would avoid her son and daughter. These events seemed to be coincidence or private reluctance to the public. but others within the palace saw these as signs of a disagreement too delicate to discuss. Princess Anne, a traditionalist, subtly expressed Edward's displeasure. She was particularly appalled by Camilla's family's rapid rise and interference in royal realms. King Charles, driven by a desire for familial solidarity, pushed for their admission, believing that a show of unity was necessary for the monarchy's survival. Edward was torn between his brother and his mother's crown ambitions due to his insistence. This was not personal distaste for Edward. He wanted to save the monarchy against progressive erosion. Tom Parker Bowles was said to have used his stepfather's prominence and mother's royal connections to gain prominent patronages and business endeavors. Invitations, titles, and opportunities were given, which Edward saw as a gradual but evident intrusion of privilege. These honors were given for closeness to leadership, not for national service or monarchy sacrifice. Edward saw it as exploitation, an intentional effort to incorporate a non-royal bloodline into the kingdom. He saw it as a betrayal of sacred trust. This competition wasn't extravagant or public. It was silent behind the showy veneer of royal cohesiveness. Smiles and polite handshakes hid the frost from outsiders. When the two parties met in the palace, the tension increased as if history weighed on the walls. Camilla tried to ensure her family's place in the monarchy's destiny, but Edward resisted, silently determined to honor his mother. Years of unspoken anger simmered like a storm. Every formal event was tense. Every private meeting resembled a polite conflict. Edward kept silent, but not out of weakness. The silence of a patient man watching and waiting to act. The treachery that shattered the silence. This protracted rivalry does not entirely account for the spectacular strike. The pivotal moment, the spark that converted subdued fury into resolute action, sprang from a betrayal Edward could never absolve. It was not the gradual accumulation of power that ultimately drove him to his breaking point. It was a solitary, brazen act of treachery concealed behind palace documents which he uncovered when it was almost too late. For months, Edward had kept his distance, enduring the murmurs and disregarding the rumors, allowing Camilla's family to revel in the reflected prestige of the crown. This finding was distinct. This was beyond mere influence. It was a theft of heritage, a revision of history, and an affront to the essence of his being. Amidst a collection of routine documents prepared for the king's review, Edward discovered a shocking revelation. Tom Parker Bowles was being discreetly positioned to inherit a distinguished royal patronage, one that had been irrevocably associated with Edward's name and reputation for decades. The patronage in issue transcended mere nomenclature. It epitomized service history and continuity. It represented a strong connection between the crown and a national institution, a connection that Edward had diligently and discreetly tried to maintain, embodying the same great feeling of obligation imparted to him by his mother, Queen Elizabeth II. Witnessing the reassignment to Camilla's son rather than to a royal by birth seemed like the worst treachery. The sting resided not just in the documentation, but also in its implications. At that moment, Edward saw his mother's memory and the confidence she had bestowed upon him as being ridiculed and disregarded. The late queen was diligent in maintaining the bloodline's holy connections to certain institutions, ensuring that significant patronages embodied the essence of lineage. For Edward, this was not just an administrative error, it was a willful violation of his mother's legacy, a calculated undermining of the principles she had ardently defended. In that moment, Edward's stillness, sometimes misconstrued as frailty, erupted into a tempest of frigid, justifiable outrage. Insider reports swiftly indicated that Camilla had advocated to Charles for the approval of the decision. Some said that she had presented it as a symbol of unification, a means of connecting her family to the crown and reconciling the old world with the new. To Edward, it constituted manipulation, a deliberate endeavor to ensure the perpetuity of her lineage at the cost of the monarchy's holy obligation. Her acceptance as queen consort was one thing. compelling her son to occupy roles designated for the successors of Elizabeth's dynasty, was an altogether different issue. Witnesses of Edward's aftermath characterized his rage as unparalleled. Longtime aides said that they saw for the first time his renowned serenity shatter into fury. He was no longer the reticent brother who endured every affront and bore every hardship without protest. This was Edward revealed a man who had suffered enough, who would not let the desecration of his mother's memory. The palace, having long been familiar with his serene disposition, was astonished. Even those who had previously seen him as docile now saw that Edward had been maintaining a thorough record, discreetly amassing complaints and diligently documenting each action that had propelled him into this moment of disobedience. The treachery escalated a latent conflict into an inescapable war. The issue extended beyond Camilla's son and his improper assertion. It concerned the defense of the crown's integrity and the preservation of tradition against the encroachment of personal ambition. Edward saw himself not as a sibling motivated by envy, but as a steward of the kingdom, a protector of an indelible heritage. In his perception, his behavior was not insurrection. It was an obligation, a solemn duty to safeguard the establishment his mother had bequeathed to him. The Covert War Council consequently, Edward began clandestine scheming, laying the foundation for a showdown that would expose the monarchy's most profound vulnerabilities. Although the castle exhibited a serene, cohesive front to the world, Edward traversed like a specter. His murmurs turned into tactics, his quietude a tool of aggression. To the public, he persisted as the reserved, obedient king, a guy never seen in the news. However, in the tranquility of the night, an entirely new reality was emerging. Nightly, Edward assembled a select group of senior courtiers who shared his profound apprehension over Camilla's growing influence. These individuals, both men and women, had served under his mother-pledged allegiance to Elizabeth's conception of the monarchy, and now apprehended that this vision was being distorted to fulfill personal agendas. They convened in subdued whispers behind doors sufficiently thick to muffle the reverberations of intrigue. During these secretive assemblies, a plan began to develop. Every aspect of Camilla's influence and every apparent overextension of her family was meticulously documented and analyzed. This was not just chatter, it constituted evidence. Edward was meticulously constructing a case piece by piece that would ultimately validate the strike he was planning. Princess Anne remained at his side throughout the whole ordeal, characterized by informed individuals as Edward's shield and sword. She was forthright, intrepid, and resolute in her defense of tradition. She offered the fortitude that Edward sometimes found difficult to express publicly. Where he faltered, she advanced. While he stayed silent, she articulated her thoughts. Their collaboration was the foundation of the opposition against Camilla's incursion. The siblings, unified in their objective, were resolute in safeguarding what they saw as the crown's immutable truth, that it was the prerogative of the bloodline, not of those who joined by marriage. Indications of support also emerged from the Prince of Wales, although more cautiously and from afar. William comprehended the perils of publicly aligning with his uncle against his father and stepmother, but he also acknowledged the menace presented by the change in patronage. For William, the monarchy's future hinged on its reputation. Permitting Camilla's son to attain such a significant position would convey the notion that familial connections supersede obligation, suggesting that the royal identity may be manipulated for expedience. In private, William expressed his tacit approbation, although in public he maintained a cautious demeanor, certain that his opportunity to intervene would arise thereafter. Even palace personnel were integral to Edward's expanding network of concealment. Confidential documents disseminated among reliable individuals shrouded in ambiguous allusions and enigmatic terminology. Some referred to it as the correction, a euphemism that had significant meaning among those privy to the truth. Others alluded to the severing, perhaps anticipating the day Edward would take his definitive action. These murmurs were sufficient to evoke both trepidation and expectation, leaving even the most devoted courtiers uncertain of the plan's extent. Throughout this period, Camilla's family remained unaware. Self-assured in their increasing acceptability, they navigated royal circles with ease, oblivious to the fact that each movement was under surveillance and every deed documented. They saw Edward's silence as capitulation. However, in truth, his quiet signified the preparation of a trap. Every hushed conversation and subtle gathering constricted the web around them, preparing for the moment of revelation. The concealment itself evolved into a dramatic element, a brewing tempest that remained unpredictable to those outside the tight group. The palace, seemingly tranquil, was in reality a chessboard, and Edward had already positioned his pieces. The eruption. A royal conflict. The morning of the announcement was utter mayhem. What started as a subdued edict executed in Edward's unpretentious manner escalated into a tumult the monarchy had not experienced in decades. No meticulously composed speech or refined news release could encapsulate the rage that surged through the royal corridors. In the first hours, the battle lines were established not on paper, but via elevated voices and unbridled passion. Camilla, taken aback and publicly embarrassed, approached Edward personally in a quiet drawing parlor at Windsor. Witnesses would subsequently remember her voice laced with incredulity as she charged him with assaulting not her son, but her dignity as queen. "You have disgraced my family," she allegedly said, her renowned poise fracturing beneath the burden of indignation. "This constitutes an assault on my person." For Mary, Edward's action transcended precedent or procedure. It was profoundly and mercilessly personal. It was a public proclamation that her offspring, regardless of their proximity to the throne, would never really belong. For Edward, it was exactly the objective. For Camilla, it was a betrayal of the most egregious kind. King Charles stood between the two, revealing the inherent vulnerability of his kingdom. His wife lamented in despair, insisting on fidelity and protection, while his brother remained steadfast in his belief, exemplifying a concept that Charles had often spoken but never implemented. The decision was excruciating, the commitment of marriage against the burden of legacy. Aligning with Edward would inflict irreparable harm on his wife. Defending Camilla was a betrayal of the institution established by his mother. In that paralysis, Charles transformed into a mute, melancholy creature. His hesitation exacerbated the divisions instead of mending them. The Prince of Wales, often the mediator of divisions, maintained silence. However, his silence was not indicative of neutrality. It was intense, weighty, and essential. Witnesses characterized him as obviously agitated. His jaw clenched, his gaze directed at Edward, as if silently imploring him to maintain his resolve. Although he remained silent, his failure to intervene sent a distinct message. William acknowledged the danger of allowing Camilla's relatives into the monarchy's inner sanctum. Princess Anne spoke unreservedly from across the room. She unequivocally and resolutely endorsed Edward's choice, her voice unwavering and steadfast. In her, Edward found formidable support, a sister unhesitant to vocalize what others only murmured in secrecy. For royal attendants, it was an unprecedented sight. They characterized it as an intense verbal altercation in which no one had the audacity to interject. The meticulously maintained decorum of the monarchy, the implicit understanding that disputes were concealed under affable expressions, had been irrevocably broken. The palace ceased to represent authority. It transformed into a stage of intense primal struggle. As doors banged and voices resonated, people outside the royal walls started to see the first fissures of truth. The public became aware of the encounter within hours. Leaks, whether intentional or inadvertent, infiltrated the media, inciting rampant conjecture. Headlines proclaimed treachery, familial conflict, and a monarchy disintegrating. Outside, the throngs intensified with some lauding Edward for his bravery, while others seethed at the display of discord. It was no longer only a matter of patronage. The matter pertained to allegiance lineage and the legitimacy of the crown, the Queen's mourning, and a pledge of retribution. Beyond the headlines and hashtags, a deeper personal tragedy emerged, the inner anguish of a kid deprived of his position and a mother rendered helpless. Under the magnificence of her crown, Camilla's fortifications were deteriorating. For the first time since ascending to the throne, she felt completely helpless, not in her capacity as a queen, but as a mother. Edward's choice deprived her son not just of a title, but also of dignity, stability, and a feeling of belonging. For Camilla, no crown diamonds nor throne could protect her from that injury. Behind closed doors, the facade of royal serenity disintegrated. Confidential testimonies from her household described a queen in tears, her voice quavering as she confided in her most loyal ladies-in-waiting. She reportedly inquired again how the monarchy could condone such brutality and how her family could be disregarded as if they had never had significance. Her desperation shifted towards Charles, the one person capable of altering the result. She discovered him immobilized, caught between the torment of his wife and the steadfast belief of his brother. Charles's silence perhaps meant as neutrality represented to Camilla the worst betrayal. She implored him not as queen to king, but as wife to husband, beseeching him to protect their family. However, Charles, constrained by the specter of his mother and the need to uphold the crown's integrity, provided no protection. In her sorrow, Camilla revealed worries that unsettled those closest to her. She saw Edward's assault as only the inception that her son's degradation was the first phase of a calculated endeavor to obliterate her family from royal existence altogether. She apprehended that every advantage, every link, and every function meticulously established since her marriage would be gradually dismantled, ultimately rendering her children and grandkids as pariahs. A chilling narrative recounted Camilla entering the castle chapel during the late hours of the night. In seclusion outside the household's attention, she was seen alone murmuring prayers into the quiet. Some said she begged for strength. Others asserted she sought absolution. Regardless of the veracity, the depiction of the queen kneeling in anguish became a symbolic representation of the extent to which the crown had shattered her soul. Amidst her sorrow, a perilous seed was sown. Those who conversed with her saw a transformation, a pledge emerging in silence, an implicit assurance that humiliation would not be the concluding statement. If Edward had initiated a conflict, Camilla would not have remained a passive victim. Subtle but undeniable murmurs suggested that her grief was solidifying into a much more perilous emotion: vengeance. Edward's proclamation: heritage resonance. After days of speculation, Prince Edward made a shocking announcement that shocked even his followers. He called his deed a sacred duty, not malice. His comments were razor-sharp in a televised speech, and he spoke with poise. He began by calling Elizabeth the only name that could silence a detractor. Edward said that his option was to honor Queen Elizabeth's crown, not tarnish it, redefining the conflict. He turned an attack into a conservation by citing the late queen. Not to punish Camilla's son, but to safeguard the monarchy his mother had shielded from outsider ambitions. His remarks became more serious once the facts revealed. Edward cited his mother's ardent desire that the bloodlines remain clean, saying centuries-old patronages should never be given up for convenience. Whatever its reality or imaginative framing, it attracted his audience. By becoming Elizabeth's executor, Edward elevated the debate from personal to religious. Not Edward versus Camilla, but Elizabeth's legacy against corruption. His silent buddies were swayed. Princess Anne stood staunch by him, proving his viewpoint was not alone. Although cautious, the Prince of Wales unambiguously supported his uncle's dedication to the enduring stability and integrity of the crown. His appearance showed that Edward's statements were about succession. Previously split public opinion changed. For every voice criticizing Edward as harsh, another praised him as the last tradition keeper. Camilla saw it as a call to treason, not duty. Edward's calm reference to Elizabeth and cooperation with Anne and William increased her isolation. He insulted her son and successfully painted her as a crown foe. Critical moment for monarchy. A single revolt has created an identity crisis, forcing the House of Windsor to answer long-ignored questions. The monarchy's fate hangs between duty and destruction. Camilla is reportedly planning her cunning revenge. Despite her apparent suffering, she is quietly gaining support from sympathetic courtiers, key politicians, and foreign diplomats who perceive her as the monarchy's more progressive and friendly representative. Camilla views her son's humiliation as a personal assault and a declaration of war, and her resolve grows with each day. Prince William the heir is caught in the fight burdened by heritage. He struggles between Edward's traditionalist views and Camilla's modernist views. His choice will affect his reign and the crown's existence. King Charles's hesitation has become a terrible symbol. He seems immobile, allowing Edward and Camilla's dispute to escalate and become more dangerous. Edward realizes the significance of his actions. He realizes this impact is permanent. He started a fire that would engulf the monarchy before it dies. He thought this was the only path. He claims to have protected something sacred at the expense of family unity. Popular faith in the monarchy declines outside the palace, yet intrigue continues. The nation is divided, with each house reflecting media debates. Edward Redeemer or disruptor, Camilla victim or manipulator. The crown has never been more fragile yet. It has also garnered unparalleled worldwide interest. This is not the end. This begins a darker, more unstable period. Every lasting monarchy paid a price. Edward's behavior reminds us that the crown requires sacrifice, sometimes of unity, peace, and love. The attack on Camilla's son was not the end of the story when the palace doors closed. The first phase of the monarchy essence battle started. Thank you for watching the video. Please let us know your thoughts and goodbye for now.